For what feels like forever, the world was on this one-way track, right? Everything getting more and more connected. But then, bam, in just a few years, the whole thing got shaken to its core. So that's what we're digging into today. Is globalization actually in retreat? And maybe the bigger question is, how did something that felt so, well, inevitable, suddenly start to look so incredibly fragile?
Okay, to really get how much has changed, we've got to rewind to the year 2000. Check out this quote from Bill Clinton. It just perfectly sums up how everyone was thinking back then. Globalization, it wasn't just some policy choice. No, it felt more like a force of nature, like gravity or the wind. Just this unstoppable thing pushing us all forward. That was pretty much the gospel. And then you fast forward to today, and that certainty is just gone. I mean, you've got a massive trade war, a global pandemic that completely broke our supply chains, and a huge war in Europe. These things didn't just poke holes in the idea of globalization, they straight up tore it to shreds. So yeah, how in the world did we get from a force of nature to, well, this? Well, that idea that this was all some unstoppable force, it didn't just pop up overnight. Not at all. It was actually the result of a very deliberate, 70-year-long project. A project that was literally born from the ashes of World War II. So, after the war, the Western democracies, with the US pretty much leading the charge, they set out on this incredibly ambitious mission. The goal? To build a brand new world order. And the big idea behind it all was economic cooperation. The thinking was pretty simple. If our economies are all tangled up, we're probably not going to go to war with each other. And they didn't just hope for it. They built the thing, pillar by pillar. You had institutions like the IMF and the World Bank come out of the Bretton Woods Conference. Their job was to keep things financially stable, to stop the kind of economic chaos that led to the war in the first place. Then you got something called the GATT, which eventually became the World Trade Organization, the WTO. Think of these as the rule books, designed to just tear down trade barriers one by one, to create a world where goods and, fingers crossed, peace could flow freely. And wow, by the 1990s, it really looks like the project had won. I mean, the Soviet Union had collapsed, democracy was spreading everywhere, global trade was absolutely booming. This was it. This was peak optimism. The moment it felt like a globalized future wasn't just possible, it was here to stay. But you know how it goes. Even at this absolute high point, there were little signs that maybe things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Underneath all that optimism, the foundation was already starting to show some cracks. The first real warning shot, you could say, was in 1999. Massive protests completely shut down a big WTO meeting in Seattle. And the real irony here? Seattle was a city that was thriving because of global trade, and yet thousands of people were on the streets. It was this huge signal that a whole lot of people felt totally left behind, furious about losing jobs and what they saw as exploitation. Then came what was probably the single biggest moment of that entire era, China joining the WTO in 2001. And man, this was a real double-edged sword. On one side, it was a huge win. We all got cheaper stuff and corporations made a killing. But the other side of that coin, it put the loss of manufacturing jobs in the West into hyperdrive and squeezed working-class wages like never before. And if you just look at the numbers, at who was actually winning in all this, it's pretty staggering. Get this, between 93 and 2015, more than half of all income growth in the US went straight to the top 1%. And the bottom 20%? They got nothing. Zero. So you can see how this fed a really powerful story that the whole system was just rigged for the rich. And of course, all that anger eventually spilled over into politics. By 2016, you had these huge trade deals like the TPP, deals that just a few years earlier would have sailed through with support from both sides. But now, they were completely toxic. You had politicians from the left and the right railing against them. It was a crystal clear sign that the public was just not on board anymore. And that's right, when those cracks in the foundation turned into full-blown earthquakes. Starting around 2016, it was just one shock after another, coming so fast. And it didn't just strain the old system, they completely shattered it. It really came in three big waves. First, you had the political earthquakes. Brexit, the America First movement, these were direct attacks on the whole idea of global cooperation. Then came the economic shock, COVID. The pandemic showed us just how ridiculously fragile our super efficient global supply chains were. I mean, one factory closes on the other side of the world, and suddenly everything grinds to a halt. And finally, the military shock. Russia invades Ukraine, and just like that, major war is back on the table, totally redrawing the geopolitical map. That US-China trade war, that was a big one. It was basically a direct assault on the entire system. I mean, for the first time, instead of going to the WTO to work things out, the two biggest economies on the planet just decided to throw out the rulebook and start a massive tariff brawl. And this wasn't just talk. The impact was very, very real. By the start of 2020, the average US tariff on stuff from China had jumped to over 19%. It was only 3% before the trade war started. That right there, that was the moment you could say the era of constantly freer trade was officially dead. So, all this chaos led to this new buzzword you hear everywhere: decoupling. Basically, after getting burned by the trade war and the pandemic, companies and governments are now scrambling to unwind their dependence on any one country, especially China. It's a total 180 from the strategy of the last 30 years. And if there was any doubt, the war in Ukraine just drew those new dividing lines in permanent marker. Instead of splitting the West apart, it actually did the opposite. It created this surprisingly strong, unified front that turned Russia into an economic pariah and made alliances like NATO stronger than ever. It really felt like the start of a new kind of Cold War, with very clear sides. So, where does all this leave us? Well, one thing's for sure, the old era is over. Done. We're in a completely new reality now, one that's all about fierce competition, these new geopolitical blocks forming, and just a whole lot of uncertainty. And the difference is just night and day. We've gone from a world where the focus was on cooperation and tying our economies together to a world that's all about competition and pulling them apart. The name of the game isn't building one big global system anymore. It's about making your team, your bloc, as strong as possible. And what about the referee from the old system, the WTO? Well, it's pretty much been benched. Its highest court can't even make binding rulings anymore. So what does that mean? It means there's no powerful umpire left on the field to call the shots and enforce the rules. For anyone in business, this is a whole new ballgame. The level of uncertainty is way up. Putting all your eggs in the China basket is now seen as super risky, and political drama isn't just background noise anymore. Nope. It's now a core factor in every single big decision you make. Which brings us to one last huge question to think about. For decades, the whole point of globalization was more efficiency, more growth. As that world breaks apart into these competing teams, we know we're losing some of that. But you have to wonder, in this new era that's all about competition and being resilient, is there anything we might actually be gaining?